partnering with the YMCA to build a regional playground structure that is inclusive, that is unlike anything else in the region, for a cost that involves United Rehabilitation Services, YMCA, in a variety of agencies and entities for a regional approach. That's the type of thing that would be more applicable. So as we look at the opportunities within the community for alternative funding for some of our projects, we first need to not create the projects based on the funding opportunity. We should set forth the policy and the goal and the strategy to have the project established, and then supplement that with alternative funding, because there's always matches. So typically PDAC funding is about $500,000 or less. It usually takes multiple cycles for a project to be awarded. If you look at the list of things, they're on year after year after year, and then sometimes they get awarded, sometimes they don't. And they just stay on. So some of the things that we've looked at and identified as possibilities include working with Five Rivers Metro and Miami County to connect recreational trails on the Rip Rap East side. We've had that discussion many times, and something that would work well. And move into the northeast area. What that looks like and what the actual map or scope is, that would be a pretty large scale thing. Also working with Miami Conservancy and the City of Dayton to construct some flood protection measures in our future well site, and some of that land that would require the ability to maybe acquire some land for the floodplain down off of Rip Rap there, that would enable us to utilize that land dedicated as recreational purpose, etc. But also have that partnership with Miami Conservancy and the City of Dayton, because they abut in that area too for flood control and management. And also partnering with organizations such as our own historical, but also Dayton History. And also, I'm not sure if Miami Conservancy would have anything to do with the old canal, but rehabilitate and improve our canal locks within the community. So those are some examples of the types of projects that would be a collaborative thing that connect with other organizations, but also have a regional impact that would enable us to move forward with some proposed projects. Of course, you get rated and scored based on a variety of things: how much collaboration you have, what the impact of the project is, driven for some of the things, and also what your proposed match is. So we need to identify the ability, if we want to take on these projects, as Brian mentioned earlier, everything that's added for potential ideas and projects, just because a funding mechanism could be potentially used for it. We need to consider that as a policy discussion and decision within the overall financial forecast and within this budget. So that's one example. Another example of a potential funding opportunity for a smaller scale thing is direct application within the state capital budget through our legislature. So we've met with our representative, and he's certainly interested in pushing forward some movement in areas that we are looking for is infrastructure, particularly stormwater management. You've heard me say it 100 times, and I'll say it 101st, that we need to give some attention to our stormwater management. That system is aging, and we are making significant costly repairs each year to it. So that's an area that we think that we can seek for some assistance regarding that. So in addition to some of our other road projects, we have the safety funding through the state. We talked about mast arms. We're talking about intersection work at Troy and Merrily Way, and also removing some of the humps, etc., on Chambersburg, along with the upcoming development plan for the Lexington Place TIF, the discussion that will come up. And all those will be applicable to those future projects. So as we continue to fine-tune and develop what we could submit as part of those projects, we'll ask for council's direction regarding what your priorities would be and what we see those opportunities to come about with some of these alternative funding things within the budget, and the numbers talk in the future.
Mr. Campbell?
Brian, do your assumptions include the portion of the income tax that will fall off for public safety?
At this point in time, yes, it includes all revenues that currently exist today continuing through the end of 2025.
And when do the public safety portions fall off?
My understanding is that those will need to be renewed on or before the end of 2025.
And what do they bring in annually?
I don't know the answer to that, sir, off the top of my head. I don't know, Jim, if you could.
I know when we increased it back in 2014, the new back then
was between $1.6 and $1.7 million.
Is that information that you could provide to us?
Yes, sir. We'll be able to break that out for you.
Yep.
Yeah, in fact, part of the budget, the revenue allocations will actually be broken down with, like we did last year, with how much revenue both the earnings tax provides and also the various levies and property tax millage. So we will have that as part of the numbers discussion, certainly. As well as what we want to include this year too. Sorry, didn't mean to jump in if you were going to say it, but as well as the time frame associated. For instance, some of the millage and some of the levies that we have date back to the 80s, et cetera, and we always want to look at of ways to relieve some of those and maybe renew or replace to provide better benefit and easier ways of understanding the various levies and millage that are on the properties in the city as well.
I'm sorry, Mr. Campbell. It occurs to me that I have all this technology packed right in here. So, to your question here, let me make sure that I'm on the right line. So, the police fund income tax for 2018, it brought in $5.7 million. We project that in 2025, at current trends, it will bring in $6.57 million. Fire fund income tax in 2018 was $2.17 million, and we project in 2025 that will bring in $2.49 million.
And note that that's complete earnings tax percentage, not just the 0.25% that's solely allocated. There's a portion of the other 2% that's also allocated for public safety and in general fund. And actually, the majority of that is the general fund allocation from the earnings tax within that $5 million to create the police fund. So specific to the 0.25%, we'll have those numbers as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Bell, Mr. Sitkowski, or Mr. Schomer regarding the budget? Yes, Mr. Webb.
Thank you, Mayor. Brian, on your previous slide, where your recommendation for council to adopt a fiscal policy with its 2021 fiscal budget, how do you envision that being presented to council or being worked through between now and then? I know 2021 is out there a bit, but you've got a lot of bulleted items here that do you see yourself as bringing these items back before council individually or?
Yes, sir. What I would foresee is us kind of putting together a general framework based on conversations that are already recorded in the minutes, some of the more recent budget decisions, some of the more recent philosophical conversations that council's had. We'll kind of pull those together and then begin kind of bringing those to you, maybe one or two pieces at a time to review and discuss in a work session to say, hey, we're making progress on this. This is kind of what we think, you want to go based on your previous discussions. Are we close? Are we far? Where do we need to be with this? And then once we get your input on all those items, we'll collectively bring it together as a document that we would attach as part of legislation that you would adopt about this time next year.
That's awesome. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor.
And actually, just to put a little bit more pressure on them, realistically, our budget process starts in June. And pretty much right after the audit's done and we get our CAFR, then we start our budget. So we're either auditing or budgeting for pretty much the entire year, split it in half. So, the goal would be is to, prior to reviewing and looking at our CIP, which I think is a large portion of what would be need to include it in a policy, that would be probably one of the first segments that we'll be looking at identifying and creating regarding a policy to look at that. So although the idea of 2021 budget seems to be far away, in actuality, we'll be starting on it as soon as we pass this budget. Right.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so is there anything that we need to move that on? Anything, or is this just for presentation purposes?
Just an informational item, sir, yes.
And there'll be a first reading of the actual budget ordinance, which is the appropriations ordinance, which is the piece of legislation that gets passed. That will be on for Monday, again, as a first reading. Only that, then back for the numbers, no?
No. As Brian mentioned in his presentation, the first reading of the final draft of the budget would be the 28th, and then we would think.
Oh, that's not. I'm late in the month already. I'm thinking we are right. My apologies.
This next meeting is the 14th.
Right.
So.
That's right. We wanted an extra work session in between. My apologies. I'm thinking that we're running late, not late like we normally do, but we are normally pushing this, and our push was to get more of the discussion out in October. So, and my apologies. I'm a week behind in myself. You're right. It's not for Monday, but we wanted to provide it tonight just to have the draft ordinance so that you can see the proposed allocations, so that we do start the numbers discussion for the next work session, which will have all of that in it. You're right. I didn't mean to scare you. Sorry. It's after the next work session we'll have the first reading.
Yes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there it is. The financial projections for the city of Huber Heights. I thought it was a good presentation. I thought there was a lot of information to pack into that 45 minutes. I hope it gives you all listening something to think about, something to ask questions about if you don't understand. And it gives us time. It's October. It gives us time as they start reading these off at different work sessions, and they start bringing this stuff back up. We'll know exactly what they're doing. So it's important to pay attention. We'll know exactly what they're spending money on or drawing back on. Hopefully, they do draw back on some spending. For me, infrastructure, public services like police and fire, and our road maintenance crews and things like that, that's essential for me. Everything else is the cherry on top. And then I would start looking at parks and recreation, but mainly parks, having places for families to go and enjoy a weekend or after school or whatever. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for me. I hope you all have a good rest of your weekend, and I will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to Truman's Town Hall. Share this podcast with your friends and neighbors and subscribe today.